It's very interesting talking to Chris about these issues. For years, I have not been saying that there is censorship in comedy and comedians are being censored, although I've often been accused of making that claim. It's not a claim I've ever made. My issue with comedy has always been that there's a lot of self-censorship going on and that comedians are worried about saying what they... or exploring areas where they feel they might get in trouble and therefore they curtail it, and that's not good for the art form. That's always been my view. And then I see this issue where someone is actually having their show banned, and I then feel like a bit of a fool, because actually maybe censorship is happening in comedy. Kate, what do you think?
OK, not absolutely. I do think that there is censorship. I think there's more self-censorship, but self-censorship doesn't happen out of the blue.
Right.
And what I think is there is no... It's back to what we've been talking about before. Everything is so binary.
Yeah.
You know, there's no middle ground. There's no discussion. And one of the things with comedy, with performers, there's no possibility of redemption.
Yeah.
You know, just like this morning I read the guy who's supposed to be directing the Tokyo opening ceremony.
Yes.
He's been dumped because he said something very mild in 1998.
I believe that was even in a comedy sketch.
Yes,
that was the context. And I don't speak the language, but it was clearly meant to be comedic.
Yes.
There are people laughing in the clip.
Yep, in character, comedy sketch, 1998.
Yeah.
So now he's lost his job. One of, I think it is the fact that, OK, maybe not fact, but the presumption, which is frequently proven correct, that once the word is out there, there is no coming back from it. There is no redemption. It's I did a radio thing, and I was talking to Tim Renkow, and he talked about this, and he says you don't get to make mistakes.
Yeah. This is something I wanted to ask you about. So, Kate's just done a show for Radio 4.
You forgot to say rather good. A
rather good show for Radio 4.
Thank
yes,
you,
I remember
actually.
you did say I should say that.
Yep.
No, it is a fantastic show, and you can listen to it. It's on BBC iPlayer.
I'm sure it is, yes.
So it's called Taboo.
Yep.
And you spoke to a number of comedians about this from various perspectives. And Tim Renkow's a good example of what you were talking about here.
Well, what I wanted...
Because he can really push it.
Oh, well, this is why I wanted Tim.
Yeah.
You see, in my heart of hearts, I do believe you should just spit it all out, say anything, then we'll work it all out, you know, in the wash, as it were. And when push comes to shove, if it's comedy, it's comedy. It's not a party political broadcast. You're not suggesting anybody goes out and does something hideously violent towards women or immigrants or anything. It's comedy.
Yes, but a lot of people do take comedy literally now. And I just wonder, what do you think of this, Nick? What do you think of this idea? The counter-argument to this is that there are lots of comedians out there who secretly want to use humour as a guise to spread racism, sexism, homophobia.
Who?
That's a very good question. I don't know who, because I've never met those people and I'm not sure they exist. But that seems to be the main argument. That actually, what do you think, Nick?
Well, yeah, I find that argument questionable because we've had this with comedians writing controversial tweets, and there are two narratives, really. One is, when you're condemning these comedians, one is an edgy comedian who that's his job, suddenly decided to abandon his whole persona and just make a racist statement, or the more likely that a edgy comedian misjudged the joke, right? And then some people might argue in misjudging the joke, it becomes a racist statement. And that is, of course, the problem with jokes. I've said it before on stage. If a joke goes wrong, it's just a horrible statement. If it's an edgy joke, you know, otherwise it just doesn't work and it's boring. So if you make an edgy joke, you miss. Yes, it sounds like a horrible statement, and you see the comedians getting condemned, and the articles are normally along the lines of comedian makes joke, and they put it in inverted commas because they're saying, no, it wasn't a joke. It was secretly a statement.
On Twitter, where there's no laughter, and so you've already...
There's no context, there's no anything, and one of the... I do kind of think, up to a point, racism, sex, any of the isms, any horribleness...
Yes.
And especially on Twitter, is very much in the eye of the reader.
Well, particularly with comedians. You see, I always give comedians the benefit of the doubt. I always assume they're doing something interesting and exploring the topic, and they're not just making flagrantly offensive statements, because why would they? They wouldn't do it on stage,
well,
so why would they do it on Twitter?
You already see on Twitter there's a disturbing percentage of the population that simply can't understand humour, right? We've learned that from Twitter.
Yeah,
they simply don't understand irony or humour.
Yeah.
So there's those people. And then there's the thing that there used to be a style of joke where you just deliberately were outrageous and edgy. Chris Morris basically made a career of it. On Brass Eye, some of the things he was saying there, but we knew they were jokes. Sarah Silverman made a career
because
of it.
there was trust in the act.
Right. But now on Twitter, a comedian does a joke, and it's the same. It's one of those jokes where it's shocking because you shouldn't say it, and that's pretty much the joke. But then people go, well, that's a statement.
Well, let me put the other argument, the other playing devil's advocate. So the other argument against things like the taboos that you were talking about in your show is that once you air those kinds of jokes, they're liable to be misinterpreted by the audience, and therefore that creates, that normalises hate in society. Do you have any thoughts on that, Kate?
Well, that is an argument, but that would also be the argument for never manufacturing another motor vehicle, because they could be used in a hit and run.
Right.
Never harvesting any more peanuts, because some people do have peanut allergies and they can die a horrible death, choking on their own vomit, writhing on the floor.
Yes.
I think it's part of the risk. I mean, like people who go in and dive with sharks.
Yes.
You could get your leg bitten off, but you could have the thrill of a lifetime. And I think a lot of people, the buzz from performing comedy is, you know, kind of a visceral buzz. The one, you're so odd. Never do research on any shows, because you can read something that makes you think, oh dear, I'm completely wrong.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
You won't know that feeling, Andrew. I was doing some research on the Taboo programme, which is basically, it was a first look at what we supposedly can't say, the areas we can't say. And as I say, I think there are places where there are real problems. There are, even, you know, in this country, we were talking about working classes, I don't mean that in a patronising way, but people with no money. There are people way below the poverty line here. There are people with real problems.
Yeah.
Real problems are not to be heard anywhere on Radio 4 Comedy or even GBNews panel show. It's, you know, people are starving to death, and really we should be looking at that before we worry about people saying yellow. But I read, and it's the most devil's advocate-y.
Well, go for it. That's what we're all about.
There's again, it's an American, and it's a very short. It's kind of a poem. Don't worry, it's very short.
Okay.
Called "Why Bother," and it just says, "Why bother?" It says because someplace, sometime in the world, there is someone with a wound the shape of your words.
Okay.
Now.
Well, that's an interesting point, though, because it's true that as stand-ups, whenever we perform, we might say something that does, to use the word, trigger something in the audience. I mean, but that surely can be the case with absolutely anything.
Yeah.
Because everyone has had experiences. You know, I used to talk about this. You know, I could tell a knock-knock joke, and someone's wife might have been crushed by a heavy door, and they would be upset by that. You know, that you can't guarantee that your material isn't going to cause offence.
And it's time sensitive.
Yes.
It's everything sensitive. I mean, I don't. There's a joke that I tell on the radio show, and it's only because it's the only time in my entire life that I can remember going,
yeah,
that's horrific, and I know if I had the power, I would never let you tell that joke again.
Yes.
And
you mustn't tell the joke now, because you'll probably get in trouble for that.
Okay, I won't tell the joke. But it was a very lovely family entertainer who told me the joke. And I know that people... It was during the HIV, the AIDS epidemic.
Yes.
And that was what it touched on.
Yes. And you knew that people would get upset by listening to that.
Well, the person who told me the joke, thought it was hilarious and not remotely upsetting.
Right.
He just thought it was a little bit of wordplay. It was a very short joke, 2 lines.
So that sounds like someone who hasn't really thought it through, though, or thought about the impact.
This was in the 80s, and...
Right.
what I know now is, sorry to keep interrupting you, but what I know now is that, well, we told the joke on the Radio 4, not a single complaint.
Yeah.
I've told it to 20-somethings, and they're like, why were you upset by that?
But that tells you a lot.
I was upset. Yes, it does. I was upset by that because dozens of my friends were dying every month of and I was the kind of... They were my friends. They were dying. And so when I tell that joke now, and the younger people and whatnot, they've never had a friend dying of AIDS.
But that just goes to show you that we bring our personal baggage in whenever we get offended. And that's not to say that... Nick, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, loads.
Good.
Well,
we haven't got that long, so let's...
Well, a couple of things. Well, the thing you said about...
Nick.
You said something about 5 things ago that was it's how the eye of the beholder argument, how people receive it. Even mainstream acts like Al Murray was criticised because the criticism was his audience are receiving the jokes without the requisite level of irony.
But that's quite patronising.
One, it's patronising, and you have no idea how they're actually receiving it. And, so even quite mainstream acts like... I forgot number 2. Even quite mainstream acts like him had that criticism, but it's not really his responsibility, as Kate was saying. It's not his responsibility how the audience receives it. So that was... So if people do an edgy joke, how can they... It's not up to... the audience are going to take it how they're going to take it. Yeah. And the other point was the argument about we've all had something that will offend us. There was a thing a while back where Louis C.K. made an offensive joke about school shooting.
Yes.
And people like Judd Apatow condemned him and said, you can't do that because I've been to the schools and blah, blah.
Right.
But that can't work as an argument. And he was destroyed by some comedians because everyone's got something that's going to be offensive to them. So how can that...
It's also very interesting with that school shooting sequence because the Independent newspaper reported by saying Louis C.K. mocks survivors of shooting. I'm like... He clearly wasn't doing that. And if we approach comedy from that perspective, that we're just going to have this literal-minded approach, I mean, it's almost Philistinism, and I worry about that. But
I've had friends who have appeared in tabloid newspapers like he stated, and it was his act on stage.
Yeah.
It was his jokes on stage.
Listen, we have run out of time, unfortunately, because we could talk about this for an awful long time, and we've actually run out of time to do your unfiltered dilemmas, so sorry about that. I was too interested in this. I'm more interested in them than you, sorry. But send them in next time, and we will get to them, I absolutely promise. That's Free Speech Nation for this week, so thank you to my panel, Kate COPSTICK and Nick Dixon, and my guests, Judy Glennie, Anne Widdecombe and Chris McGlade. And if you haven't already, please do check out Free Speech Nation, the podcast, which is available on all major audio streaming services as well as YouTube. We're 6 episodes in already, and my guests have included Ian Hersey Ali, Hayden Prowse, Jeff Norcott, Baroness Kate Hoey, Helen Joyce, and of course Anne Widdecombe. So you can catch up on all of those podcasts when you have the time. So why not check them out? So anyway, this was the week when Leeds City Council decided to problematise cake. The Democrats launched an attack on racist